Hi, I'm Adam Zonda, the production manager for the Hangar Theater Company, and welcome to another episode of In Good Spirits. As we have gone virtual for the 2020 summer season and everyone is working from home, I am currently sitting in an empty theater, which is very weird considering it is during the summer. Between the ongoing pandemic and this being my 25th season with the Hangar, we thought having some conversations with the various designers and technicians with whom I've worked over the years would be fun and in good spirits. I'd like to take a moment to give a large thank you and shout out to our series sponsor, Meyer Farm Distillers, located in Ovid, New York. Joe and his team produce various award-winning vodkas, gins, and my personal favorite, bourbons. Please check them out at meyerfarmdistillers.com. Today, I'm having a conversation with Dani Snyder-Young, a good friend and currently an assistant professor at Northeastern University. Great to see you, Dani. How are you today?
It's great to see you. I'm really good. How are you?
Fantastic. And the family is all healthy and well, I hope?
Everyone is healthy and well. My husband and my 5-year-old daughter are happy and healthy.
Great. So let's start a little bit at the beginning, so to speak. How did you get interested in theater?
Back to the very beginning.
Yeah.
Well, I think like a lot of people, I started off interested in acting. My godparents were avid theater goers. My godfather participated as an actor in a lot of community theater productions. And so when I was little, 4, 5, 6, we would go to the local community theater and see him play Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof, see him in Hello, Dolly. And I just thought it was like amazing and glamorous. And my godmother would take me, I grew up in Connecticut, my godmother would take me into New York to see shows in New York all the time growing up. And so I got to see a lot of really extraordinary theater growing up and wanted, like a lot of kids, to be one of them on stage. And I went away to sleepaway summer theater camp and I found my people. And like, this was, the theater people are my tribe of weirdos. And as a teenager, to find that sense of belonging in the theater, like who would want to do anything else or be anywhere else? As a teenager, I found my way into directing. So my high school didn't have a kind of drama club theater program. And so my senior year, I was expected to do some sort of honors independent study. And so I made there be a theater program. And they gave me the free run of the auditorium and a little bit of seed money and let me first run a couple of workshops, and a quarter of the student body showed up. And I went to the principal and said, like, all right, there's an actual demand for this, and you don't have a drama teacher, but you have me, so let's put on a show. So I directed 2 productions my senior year of high school, and by the time I was going to college, I knew I was a director. I went to Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut, where I got a BA in theater and a real generalist education in theater. So I was a theater English double major, studying, right, like doing everything. And made my way, and then I made my way to you, Adam.
Thank you.
Because the Hangar was my first job out of college.
Great, I love that. Yep. Before we get to that, though, so what was the first Broadway show you saw?
It was a chorus line when I was 10.
Nice.
There's a lot in there I did not understand.
Really, as a 10-year-old, I'm shocked.
Yeah, shocking.
So your first season in The Hangar was 1999, and you were the stage manager for some of the Kid Stuff series shows.
That's right.
Is there anything from that season that sticks out to you?
Oh, I remember The Sorcerer's Apprentice, which Daniel Kramer directed. Nice. And it was this really imaginative retelling of The Sorcerer's Apprentice, centering around elemental spirits. And so there was an ensemble of 4 women, all in different colors, each embodying a different spirit. And it was this very devising heavy artistic process, building out this world in which these spirits controlled the sorcerer's magic. It was like much more aesthetically interesting than I was expecting children's theater to be. And Daniel is a fantastic collaborator. I really loved getting to work with him. And that was a pretty exciting introduction to the Hangar.
Great. You then returned a couple years later as a company manager in 2001.
It was like the hardest job I've ever had.
Yeah, I understand that. But was that your first foray into like administration?
Yes. So I was 23 years old and I had never found an apartment for myself. The apartment I lived in in Boston, I had found, like, a friend had found it for me. And I arrived at the theater the theater was under new administration that year. And whoever was responsible for securing company housing, something had changed. And when I arrived a week before everyone else, we did not have housing for a third of the company. And so I had a week to figure out how to rent not one apartment for me, but like a lot of apartments for everyone. It was a trial by fire. I now know how to negotiate a lease, useful life
Right?
skills, but it was
Fantastic.
absolutely, yeah, probably the hardest job I've ever had.
I understand that. I understand that. Um, so much more recently, you've been in academia now for like 15 years or so,
Yeah,
maybe a
something
little
like that.
longer, but somewhere in that. So what drew you to academia as opposed to staying in professional theater?
Yeah, so I had been cycling through stage management and directing, primarily finding my way into stage management because I wanted to be in the room. And I really liked collaborating with smart people. And I'm organized. Like, I can make a list and check things off, and I can run a room. I can walk in and basically get people to do what I want them to do and think that it's their idea. And that's a major stage management skill that
Yes,
is
yes, it is.
that transfers into into lots and lots of other contexts. But it's really hard to earn a living as an artist in the United States, and the model for artists is nomadic. And so I was I was living in Boston, and I was working in small professional theater. I had a day job in the costume shop at Boston College. I was stage managing small, first initially non-union and then union shows around town, really for health insurance, and building a more and more robust directing portfolio. And at the point at which I was able to let go of my day jobs and really do the directing, I realized that to be a professional artist was going to be a nomad and to go from city to city to city. And I had when I was 26, I had 6 months that I did 4 shows in 4 different cities. And it was an amazing opportunity to be able to really like do what I thought I wanted to do. And it
Hmm.
was so miserable. And
Oh,
I hated being a nomad, and the art just got progressively worse and worse and worse because theater is site specific and audience specific. And when I approach a production, I ask the question, why tell this story here and now to these people? But I didn't know where I was. Where's here? Who are these people? I have
mhm.
no idea. Why am I doing this show? Because they're paying me enough money to pay my rent back in Brooklyn. All right, here I am. Let's put on a show. And so the theater I was doing was like not very good, and I was not very happy. And like any upper middle class kid, I looked around. I was like, okay, this is not working. I am burnt out. I should go to graduate school. And
And that
somewhere
was
in
that was NYU, right?
That was NYU. And
Got it.
so in my like roster of freelance hustles, one of the things I fell backwards into was a teaching artist job in which I had a once a week job teaching um, teaching drama to fifth graders at a charter school. And I was terrible at it. And it was one of the first things I had ever tried to do that I couldn't just kind of figure out how to do it. And I realized that teaching was an actual skill that someone needed to teach me how to do. And so I went to grad school at NYU for educational theater to learn how to teach, understanding that whatever it was I was going to do next, teaching would be some piece of that puzzle. And I got into that program. I was there for not very long. And Philip Taylor, who recently passed away, looked at me and said, "You are a very good writer. You should stay for the PhD." And I didn't even know what that meant. I didn't know that meant I was going to be a professional researcher. I just knew that it meant that I could stay in New York for another 3 or 4 years. I didn't have to like figure out my next thing because I could be in grad school.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I got into academia kind of for all the wrong reasons. But
But so when you found out that you could be a professional researcher, so to speak, is that where the dramaturgy part came about?
yeah, it turns out that that's pretty interesting, right? And I'm an action researcher. I'm a participatory researcher. So a lot of the research, I mean, I do research that is dramaturgical, but a lot of the research that I do is about the ways in which people who make theater, the sense they make of their experience as participants, and the impacts that the experience has on them, or the way that spectators of theater understand what it is that they're seeing and the impacts of the performances on the spectators. And so my body of work, I studied applied theater, so theater in the service of education, community engagement, conflict negotiation, rehabilitation, health and wellness. And so I work in different issue areas, usually in collaboration with different community organizations who specialize in that issue area. And I design projects to understand what theater is, how people are using theater, and what theater is doing to the people who are either making it or seeing it.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. So, you know, in looking through some of your work, um, you know, for our audience, boiling it down a little bit, it's seems to be a little bit more of how theater is a reflection of society and a way to make changes within it.
Yes.
Was there any sort of specific moment or event when that sort of became the focus for you?
Um, I want to answer that. I want to have a really good answer. And I think that that came from the research piece, that as I was interested in what theater was doing to audiences, for example, the answer, it's entertaining them, wasn't necessarily that interesting to study, right? What's it doing? It is giving pleasure and joy. Often work that gives pleasure and joy also has like some problematic undercurrents in it, like you're shutting off your
Yes.
brain. And so that was not as interesting for me to study as work that is trying to make change in the world to see what it is or is not able to do.
Very good. Very nice. Your one of the lines in your bio says that your focus is on contemporary U.S. activist performance.
Yeah.
Could you do a little explanation for the audience as to what that actually is?
Well, it can entail a whole range of things, but my most recent book, which comes out in October, looks at specifically anti-racist theater produced by mainstream, that is white-led, predominantly white organizations. And so this is theater that productions that have an explicit goal of intervening in racism. That is a form of activist performance. And that's one that mainstream theaters tackle. I sometimes study, I have a National Endowment for the Arts grant that is in progress that's looking at theater and storytelling and as part of addiction recovery processes. So I'm collaborating with Phoenix Tales Recovery Storytelling, and they work with people in recovery from addiction to develop solo performances out of their own personal stories. So those are two different forms of activist performance doing very different kinds of things in very different ways.
That's really, really interesting and a great way of looking at how theater can actually help people. Because a lot of times we forget that theater can actually help people, even if it's just the entertainment value of, you know, forgetting what's going on for 90 minutes or so, but also can be used as a little tool to help people with their own thing, with whatever they have going on as well. So you mentioned your second book. Clearly, it was written, you know, slightly a while ago, but seems to be very, very relevant with what's going on today. Some good forethought you had there. So what's the title again?
Yeah, so the book is Privileged Spectatorship, Theatrical Interventions in White Supremacy. And so this book looks at the impacts of anti-racist productions produced by predominantly white institutions on their real audiences who really come. And those audiences are comprised mostly of upper middle class white people. And so looking at what evidence we can see of the impact of these productions on their real audiences.
Yeah, I feel confident that most theaters have done surveys and that the majority of their audiences are upper middle class white people.
Well, that's the, I mean,
Yeah.
the National Endowment for the Arts did an industry-wide study, and the theater attendance tracks with household income. People most likely to go to the theater are over 55, white, and affluent. Household incomes over $150,000.
So with all of the current information that's out and about, you know, specifically with We See You and the other movements within theater, how do you think how do you feel your book is going to play into all of that?
It's so funny because the speed of academic publishing, like I finished the book a year ago.
Right, right.
And so I think that there are some things that I would speak of differently, having had the experience of the last several months. One of the things that I really ground the book in is that the performances of white audience members in response to anti-racist plays, I mean, they're frequently problematic. And I am embarrassed that I did not notice them until I was like very late in my 30s and doing a stint as a popular press theater critic. And so watching a lot of plays and watching a lot of white audience members respond in ways I did not understand. And BIPOC people do not have the luxury of ignoring the ways that white people perform our whiteness. And so a lot of the patterns of behavior that I recognized, like I didn't, they're research in that I studied them, but they're not new knowledge because lots of people already knew that white people behaved in these ways.
Right.
And so I hope that readers who have experienced the kinds of microaggressions and performances that white audience members engage in the theater feel seen as I've documented some of these patterns. And I hope that the platform that I'm able to have because I'm a scholar and because Northwestern University Press publishes my work will be able to be used as some fuel to be able to help move forward initiatives to help educate audiences, to help keep artists safer, to help build an anti-racist theater. That there are some real disconnects between intention and impact. And that in order to be able to bridge the change that we want to make, I say we as a white theater maker, like we have to pay attention to what impacts our work is actually having, what we can see.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. It's been a very eye-opening movement, which I don't necessarily know would have the traction it does now if all the theaters were still actually up and running.
It gives us a moment to reflect, right?
Exactly.
We have to, and it's and there are a lot of institutional practices that are not sustainable, a lot of industry-wide practices that are not sustainable and that are designed to create an elite an industry that centers a kind of eliteness, and an industry that centers the experiences of people who grew up with a lot of money, right? We have unpaid internship trajectories through our industry, and the ways in which we do things, if we actually want a wider array of people to feel like the theater is their home in the way that I felt like the theater was my home, we have to do things differently. And that's different artistic work, and that's different front of house norms. And that's it's like change is disruptive.
But it's also good, because otherwise it gets a little monotonous.
Yeah, well, and how sustainable is an industry whose audience just gets older and older and older?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And because every theater is always trying to figure out how to get anyone under the age of 40 to come and see a show. Let alone any BIPOC audience members, just anybody under 40 to come and see a show.
Well, and that's not totally true. Like I was a member of an ensemble theater in Chicago for 5 years in my 30s, and that was a small ensemble theater rooted in a working class neighborhood in Chicago with a legitimately diverse ensemble whose members lived in lots of different neighborhoods and had like lots of lives outside of the theater. And that ensemble drew with them to the theater a very diverse array of audience members. It was an intergenerational theater. So I was working with artists in their 70s and artists in their early 20s, and there were always a lot of young people in those audiences because they worked under a radical hospitality initiative in which 30% of the house was held for free tickets every night, and any tickets that hadn't been sold in advance at the start of, when the house opened were free. And so it disconnected the act of buying a ticket from the act of attending the theater, and it made it a much more palatable experience for people who didn't necessarily have disposable income, and people for whom a an $80 ticket is like a major investment. And
Oh yeah.
so that's also a piece of it. And, you know, these are different, they're different economic structures. Like radical hospitality is underpinned by a different kind of board structure and donor structure. Like
Hmm.
there are ways of doing things, but yeah, disruption disrupts.
Yep. Got it. And got to figure out what works within your personal, or not personal, but within your theater's community,
Yeah,
and how to
absolutely.
adapt and work within all of that. No, that's really, really interesting, especially as we said, in the light of what is all happening in the last couple of months
Yes.
within the industry. So, what is your opinion on where theater might be heading with all that is going on between the various movements and the pandemic in general?
Oh, uh, so there's where is theater going? What is happening in the next 18 months with theater? So I have a team that's working on a digital performance research initiative. And so we're seeing a lot of really interesting ways that artists are using theater-based skills to build connection across distance. And so we're seeing sound walks, we're seeing Zoom theater that is making real aesthetic use of the limits of the white box. We're seeing procedurally authored performances in which audience members are given a series of prompts. Maybe it's over an audio track, maybe it's over a telephone, maybe it's over a conference call, maybe it's on paper, to create an experience, an embodied live experience in their own space in relationship to their own environments. So there are lots of ways of working socially distanced, in addition to outdoor theater, right? Like there's this
Right.
whole capacity that we have to make mask spectacle outdoor theater that is socially distanced, because that's rooted in its core aesthetics. And I think that next summer we'll see more mask-based spectacle outdoor stuff, because we'll have time to plan for that. Maybe even later in the fall we'll start seeing some of that. But beyond this, once this moment of pandemic has passed, and it will, I think that there will be a set of theaters that will return to the practices that were successful for them before, and I suspect that they will continue to work in much the same ways that they were before. And that is cynical, but that is also my recognition of a material structure of the theater industry, in which there are institutions that are large and that are powerful, that have a kind of financial backing from populations that like certainly are interested in what is happening, but are not directly impacted by institutional racism.
Hmm.
And that there will be a subset of theaters that will continue to make a kind of art for upper middle class white people, and that works for them and it'll keep working for them. I would like to see there less of it, and I think there will be fewer theaters that make it through that do that, but I think there will still be a set of that. I would love to see more theaters really engaging with the specificity of what they can do in their communities. And so to ask the question, who needs storytelling and community building here and now? And find ways of using, whether that is formal production or participatory workshops, to be able to engage with the real people who surround them, and find the financial structures to be able to support paying a living wage for people to do that work. And a lot of institutions have education programs in which they do that, but it's treated as marginal or secondary. So through this period in time, a lot of those programs are the ones that can move forward, because they can move into because virtual workshops are still workshops. And so how does the centering of those revenue streams impact the ways that theaters understand those departments as we move out of this moment?
That's a really interesting way of looking at it. You know, one of the things that we've certainly realized with the virtual seasons that we're doing is, obviously we have a much broader audience in terms of geography. because, you know, you don't physically have to be in Ithaca to see the show. You can be literally anywhere to see the shows. And that is also, I think, helping all of this along, because you can then have a better option of being able to pick and choose what might be of interest to you, but also just being able to engage with a much wider audience. And then you're truly not limited to the people who are within, you know, roughly an hour's drive of you.
Well, and you're able to curate audiences in much more intentional ways, that you can do performance events that draw people who already belong to virtual communities around, for example, a recorded stream of a performance you can do in conjunction with an organization, with a site that already is a center of community for an affinity group, and then be able to curate a conversation with just that group in a way that is much more efficient than doing that in a live theater, because you don't then require people to physically get themselves to the theater.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we've just been, as I said, we've been hearing from people all over the place who've been viewing our productions, and it's been fantastic.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
because obviously some people have been, you know, we're in Ithaca, which is how they knew of us. And then for whatever reason, they, you know, had to move, leave, whatever. So
one of the sort of splendid things about this moment has been realizing that distance is not the barrier that it felt like it was. So rekindling friendships with people who I had fallen out of touch with because we live far apart. Being able to engage with the artistic work of institutions that I love, that I used to live near at some other moment in my life that I don't anymore. Being able to take exercise classes with my favorite instructors in the cities I don't live in anymore, right? All of that is possible through these virtual communications that were available previously. It just didn't occur to anybody that we should center them in the way that we now have to.
You know, but there's still a part of it about physically being with other humans in a room that is one of the things that's severely lacking right now.
Well, and the specialness of the theatrical event. So carving out the time and then picking yourself up and going to the time and going somewhere at an appointed time that is not your home and doing a thing. And sometimes it's easier to carve out time to do something if it is in a separate space, she says, with a 5-year-old in the other room.
Of course.
And so, you know, that finding ways of binding theatrical events as special in social distancing is one of the challenges. But I've seen some interesting ways of doing that. This Is Not a Theater Company's Play in Your Bathtub is a procedurally authored experiential performance event that participants create in their own homes, in their own bathrooms, and it had very specific set of instructions. I mean, it happened at a particular time. So at 3:00 in the afternoon, I was going to the theater in the bathroom, and a specific set of instructions around creating a set of props, around setting the scenography of the space in a way to make this a special event that is distinct from all of the other times in the day that I might be brushing my child's teeth in the bathroom, or, you know, combing my own hair, or whatever it is that I happen to be doing. And so that finding ways of binding an event as special, I think, is something that we have the capacity to do. I mean, theater makers what we know how to do is create experiences. So how do we think about that specialness of the theatrical event in your own home?
Yeah, no, it is a great way of trying to recreate, or not recreate, but experience that event, as opposed to just watching something again.
And different virtual platforms create different senses of community. So I'm working with a team of undergraduate research assistants. And so they experience events on a late night hip hop cipher on Instagram has a really active chat in which audience members are shouting out and talking to each other. And there is a feeling of party on the chat that to people in their 20s feels like group chat. That gives them a sense that something is happening here and it is live and it is an event. And the social media, the Instagram platform sort of amplifies that in ways that YouTube doesn't, in ways that Zoom does. I mean, Zoom can, but we often don't, because Zoom to me feels like it's how I go to work every day. So
Right.
it feels professional in a way. But also I'm in my 40s, and so I engage differently with the chat than my assistants in their 20s.
Mhm.
And so, but as we think about what do these platforms do, what vibe do they have, what are their, well, what are their limitations, but also what opportunities do those limits open up? I think that
Mhm.
and I think the technology is going to get better. This form, this digital performance form, isn't going away. We have a whole generation of theater makers who are training on it. They're going to keep using it.
Yeah, and I do think that when we can actually re-congregate again, that theater is going to be allowed to do a combo of all of this, because you're going to have a lot of people who want to see and experience theater who probably shouldn't or can't, really leave their homes.
Mm.
And again, making sure that you're offering the theatrical event to everybody in your community. So
Well, and
this has been
who
great,
needs that
Dani.
community? Yeah, this has been great. I'm
Thank
so
you
glad
so
to get
very
to catch
much.
up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love having these conversations. It was great to see you. I would like to once again thank the sponsor, Meyer Farm Distillers, and thank you so much for joining me today, Dani. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Adam. It has been great to get to catch up.